Sabine bu kadar kısa zamanda bize geldiği için çok teşekkür ederim. Thank you very much in this little time that you have. You came here and you're spending some time here. Hep beraber Sabine'yi dinliyoruz. Biraz geç kaldık, kusura bakmayın. Başlıyoruz seni. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me? No.
İşte problem orada zaten.
Do you hear me now? No.
Yes, over.
There is Now? Yes. Thank you very much for inviting me. Of course, I'm very happy to be with you today, and I hope we will spend a nice day now in the morning here in Chelsea and in the afternoon in Ephesus. What I would like to present is not a general lecture on Ephesus. Of course, I know that most of you are experts on Ephesus and you know a lot about the archaeology and the history of Ephesus, so there is no need to start at the beginning and to finish at the end. What I would like to do is to talk about our research results, to share with you our recent results, but also to explain you perhaps what we are doing and how we reach or how we gain our results. You will see some odd images, I think. You would not expect it, but then I will try to explain what we are thinking about that. And of course, what I always do is to share unpublished results with you, also for your tours in Ephesus. So, my first part of the lecture will focus on the harbor of Ephesus, because we did a lot of research in the harbor of Ephesus in the last years, but also because the harbor is the heart of the city. And it always has been the heart of the city, and I think it's the most important aspect of the city of Ephesus and also of the landscape. So without the harbor, no settlements in the region of Ephesus, and because of this very, very good harbor situation, Ephesus had the opportunity to become a mega city in the Roman times. And this, the upper image, you know, this is made from Pamučak, from the northern coast of Pamučak, and you have to imagine that this was the image the people arriving in Ephesus had. It's very impressive, the two mountains, Bulbul in the south, Panayada in the north, and in between you have just to imagine this beautiful mega city and the port. So I think it was a very, very impressive arrival in the city of Ephesus, and the lower picture shows the same, the canal and the harbor basin. So Ephesus was, I will talk about that, at least from the Roman imperial time onwards, connected with the sea via a canal. Ephesus, as you all know, was not forgotten, so people in the Middle Ages and also later on knew where Ephesus was, and we have a lot of travelers coming to Ephesus looking for the ancient site, and those travelers also made sketches. This is a sketch, I think it's early 19th century, and it shows the harbor and the harbor canal. So this is, of course, an image before the whole region was rearranged by technical intervention. So this is the natural site of the natural appearance of the Ephesian harbor and the canal after antiquity and after people left the region. And now it's quite interesting that you all, I think all of us, we have the impression of the Ephesian, of the Roman harbor basin, of the port of Ephesus, this hexagonal harbor basin. But, and this is really striking, there were no investigations, no excavations going on in the harbor so far. So everything we know goes back to sketches of the 19th century. These are the sketches of Faulkner, and he interpreted and reconstructed the harbor basin like this. And you will see it also now in modern publications. It's the same reconstruction. But you have to keep in mind, this reconstruction is not based on investigation, on geophysical investigation or excavation. It's just a hypothesis. It's very, I think also it is very realistic, but nevertheless, you know, it's a hypothesis from the 19th century. So this is what we know from the harbor basin of Ephesus, and why no excavations, why no investigation. It was in the past, it has been very difficult because it's a swampy area, you know. During winter time you cannot even walk to the harbor of Ephesus because it's flooded. In summertime, some summers, like this summer here, is very hot, so then you can do something in the harbor basin because the water is not so high, but in winter, but there are other summers where you can't do anything in excavation because immediately you will be in the swampy area and you will gain no results. I'm talking about this because you know that the opening of the harbor is always in discussion for tourists, and so perhaps we can talk about this in the discussion after my lecture as well. What we did is core drilling, a lot of core drillings to reconstruct the coastal line of Ephesus, and this is now our reconstruction. You see the coastal line, perhaps this will work like this. No, I think doesn't work. You see, but you may read it. The first big picture is the coastal line in the Neolithicum. So this is the period when people, settlers arrived here in the region. You know, Çukuricihöyük and Abalyahöyük are the Neolithic sites. But the sea went far east into the basin near up to Bellevue. So this was more or less the coastal site in the 7th millennium BC. Then the next slide or image is the Archaic period. So the alluvium is now going west, you see, but you still see this broad harbor, natural harbor area. And this was, I think, the main reason why a lot of settlers came to this region, because of this different type of harbors, very natural harbor site. It was very easy to defend them as well. So then the third image is the Roman Imperial period and the Byzantine period. So that was a time when the sedimentation process, you know, the progression of the alluvium was already a big problem for the people of Ephesus, you know. And so working in Ephesus, you really feel, I think I feel it, how the people try to avoid the catastrophe, how they worked again the sedimentation process. They cleaned the harbor, they built channels, they did everything to keep the access to the sea alive. But as you know, from the Middle Ages onwards, this was simply not possible because of, I think, because of infrastructure. There was not a governmental infrastructure like in the Roman Imperial period, and so Ephesus lost its connection to the sea, and this is the last period, this late Byzantine, and then also Seljukish Ottoman period, where we have the harbors in Pamukkale. So there was one harbor in Aqua Fantasia that's investigated. And then you have the Kaistros River and channels to Ayasuluk, and we know that small vessels still arrived the city of Ayasuluk in the Turkish period. But it was never, it was not anymore a harbor city like in antiquity. Here you see, and that's what I did also in the last 2 years. I had a lot of time to do research in the last 2 years. And so I was working on the Hellenistic Ephesus, because this is still a quite unknown period in the history of Ephesus. And now we are able to reconstruct the coastline in the Hellenistic period, and it looks like this. And also in detail, you see here is the broad picture. You just keep in mind Ephesus, Arsinoea, so the city which was founded in 300 BC. And now these are the details. And we did a lot of core drillings. The dots here are core drillings. And you see that this harbor, the natural harbor basin in the Hellenistic period, 300 BC, was perfect. It was really perfect for a harbor city, but also perfect in the sense of a geostrategic position. And I think that is something we have not been kept in mind so far, that for Lysimachos, the military component was a very, very strong one, and Ephesus was a wonderful point for him, for his fleet, yeah, to be based here in the harbor of Ephesus. So in my point of view, this is the most important reason for Lysimachos and the other Hellenistic kings and also queens, you know, to invest in Ephesus and to build this Hellenistic city. So it's the military component we should not forget. About the harbor installations of the Hellenistic period, it's quite difficult to reach them because they are 4 or 5 meters below the modern surface. It's very difficult to excavate, but we have found by geophysical surveys, you see the white strings, so these are, I think, moles or K-walls or something like this. And that's what we now are able to reconstruct. I think this image is very important for you if you're guiding to explain Ephesus, because you really have a very hard job, in my point of view, because of course it is easy to show monuments, but it's really difficult to tell a story of Ephesus because everything changed a lot during the last hundreds of years or thousands of years. So, but this image perhaps give you an, I hope gives you an impression about the changing of the Hellenistic harbor bay and then the Roman harbor bay, yeah, or the port of Ephesus, because in the Roman imperial period it's not anymore a harbor bay, but it's an artificial port built by the Romans, you know. So here you see the Hellenistic harbor bay and you see all the monuments, the Roman monuments which were built after the artificial port of Ephesus was created, and then the Romans had artificial land. They put a lot of sand, a lot of material into the former Hellenistic harbor bay, and they built the Olympieion, the harbor gymnasium, the halls of Verulanus, and also the Arcadianae was elongated to the west to connect the port of Ephesus with the city of Ephesus, especially with the theater. So this was a Roman artificial expansion. It's very interesting from also from a technological infrastructural point of view. Coming back to the Hellenistic city of Ephesus, what I also did is to, and this is the middle upper image, to look for all Hellenistic evidences in Ephesus, and there are not so many, yeah, and it's quite difficult to get an image of the city of Ephesus, but I'm quite sure, and now I think I have to go to the slide, I'm now quite sure that the city center, or you know Ephesus, that the Hellenistic city center was located more or less where the later Agora was located, the upper Agora, the upper city, and also the cemeteries, the Hellenistic necropolis. You see here they are marked in red, you know, so they are east of the city of Ephesus, while the western necropolis, you will see images later on, they are all Roman. Yeah? So now what I think I'm really sure that the Hellenistic city center of Ephesus has been below the later Roman Agora, super now it's working, the Roman Agora, so somewhere here. This was the Hellenistic city center. What is preserved from the Hellenistic city? This is a pity and it's a problem because later on Ephesus was, you know, the mega Roman city. Everything was reused, was rebuilt. So there are only a few sculptures. One of it, you know him, Lysimachos is on display in the museum in Selçuk. We have coins showing the wife of Lysimachos, Arsinoeia, and Ephesus was named after his wife. And then we have some structures, what we call in archaeology, and a little bit of pottery. And so this is the pottery, and all of this pottery was also found at the Upper Agora. So this is pottery from the 3rd century BC, so perhaps 15 years after the foundation. Of course, what is preserved from the Hellenistic city, and you all know it, it's the fortification wall. This was used also during the Roman imperial period, so this 9-kilometer long fortification wall is preserved. We also have one aqueduct preserved from the Hellenistic period, and of course grave reliefs, funeral reliefs, and another head, so-called Arsinoe II. Something I would like to share with you is also information, and I'm quite sure that I'm right, it's my hypothesis, but perhaps you know this Felsspalt temple, the crevice temple. I don't know what is in English, what is in Turkish. This is the first temple. You know, if you go to the lower entrance on the right side, there is a temple. Only the foundations are preserved. It's outside of the touristic area. And this temple is the only one from the Hellenistic period, and it was always questioned which goddess or god was worshipped in this temple. And by very detailed analysis, I think I found out that this was a temple of Aphrodite. So if you go through Ephesus with your groups and you're talking about temples, which is also quite difficult, because we don't have a lot of temples preserved in Ephesus, but now we are quite sure to have this temple of Aphrodite at the lower entrance. I may show you the place today in the afternoon. And we know from literary sources that Ephesus had this temple of Aphrodite in the harbor region. But as you see, nothing is preserved. So now another look at the, what I really would say at the heart of Ephesus, the harbor, and now the harbor development. I've shown you already the Hellenistic situation where it was a huge harbor bay, and then it get narrowed and narrowed and narrowed because of the progression of the sediments, and so the people first had to build a canal. And this canal was narrowed and narrowed and narrowed, and in the 11th century at the port of Ephesus was closed. But along the harbor there is a lot of activities ongoing. So we are looking at Ephesus now just at the city center, and also you with your groups, you show them, of course, just the city center, but I think we have to imagine it's a huge city and a huge infrastructure. And only the harbor canal is 6 kilometers long to Pamukkale, and on the way from Ephesus to Pamukkale you have different kinds of buildings, necropolis, churches, everything. I will show some of the examples, but also something outer harbors. You don't have one harbor, there are several outer harbors. Along the harbor, now we try to do geophysical investigations, and they work perfect here in Ephesus. We have amazing results with georadar. So this is, if you can go into details, you see the houses, and sometimes you see the doors, and so it's really amazing. The only problem we have, looking, for instance, at this field is private property. You know, it always depends on the permit where you can do the geophysical survey, but fortunately we got a lot of permits, as you see. And so now we know that the whole harbor base was intensively overbuilt with a lot of streets, smaller shops, bigger buildings. So this is the area, you know, the working spaces of Ephesus, you know, not the representative city quarters like Upper Agora, the Celsus Library and Theatre, but here the mass of people lived, perhaps a lot of them in poor conditions, and here trading activity took place. Due to our geophysical investigations, we are now really able to define the city quarters of Ephesus and also the street grid. So this is just a reconstruction of the street grid, as a lot of ancient cities had this kind of grid, and this is more or less now the last reconstruction of the city center, the Upper Agora, Lower Agora, and Olympium, but these are also the images you have on the plates in Ephesus, which we did together with the museum in Seljuk. So now coming back to the harbor landscape, this is not visible, of course, but I think it's very important to know the situation. Also here along the harbor channel we did a lot of investigations, and what we know is that for kilometers there is a huge necropolis on each side, on north and south. It's marked in green here. And this is the largest necropolis of the Roman period. So while the Hellenistic necropolis was east of Ephesus, used and also used in the Roman period, the Western necropolis were founded in the Roman imperial period, 1st century AD, and then used until the 5th century AD. And so you have to expect the travelers arriving in Ephesus via the canal, they went through a cemetery, one tomb next to the other. So this was the arrival in Ephesus, and now just think about in other cities, not coastal cities, you have the street of tombs. The best one is the Via Appia in Rome, so it's best known, but also in Hierapolis. You know this? Entering Hierapolis, you have this huge necropolis on each side, and here you have not a street, a paved street, but a waterway, with tombs on each side. This is singular. There is no second example in the world for this. So, something is missing now? No, and so, just the canal, I'm sure you know the canal, this was made from Pamukkale to Ephesus, but this, you have to imagine that passengers arrived at Ephesus like this, and on each side the tombs. And that's how it looks like. You know, we have documented over thousands of tomb houses, and in each tomb house, you know, a lot of graves. You see here, so one grave has been, one tomb house has been excavated, and all in all, I think there are 400 or 500 graves in one house. Only in this grave, this is one grave, we had about 113 skeletons. A lot of children, of course, but nevertheless, you know. So you see that these the people were, not the skeletons, but the dead were really put together in graves. And what I also said, outer harbors. Outer harbors, and this one is one of the outer harbor, and this is the most interesting one. And there we have an amazing result also by geophysics. You see this building, this was located next to the outer harbor. I don't know now. And this building is a huge villa. It has 10,000 square meters. And it's the first villa of this type investigated in Turkey. We have to expect thousands of villas like this here. You know, we know the type of this villa very well from Northern and Central Europe, but of course here in that region, if we would do systematic surveys in the hinterland of each city in Anatolia, we would find, I'm quite sure, thousands of this villa, because this was a very fertile land. But of course we are happy to have it here in Ephesus. So this was also, of course, a natural harbor bay at the beginning, and then, this is so-called Heybeli-Tepe, this was also a very important harbor up to the Ottoman period, and this is the development of the harbor bay. But what you see here is, I will show you where it is. You see this green? So it looks like a dune, yeah, a cave. And we investigated this this piece here, and we found out that this was artificially made, and it had a lot of cave walls and a lot of structures for loading material and embarking material and so on. And now it is quite interesting, because there is a literary source mentioning artificial harbors made by very wealthy Ephesians. Yeah? And Philostratus is the source, if you want to, and he's talking about Flavius Damianus. And he mentioned, I'm sure you know Damianus Stoa, you know the Stoa, you know the guy, he was very rich, and Philostratus talking about Flavius Damianus, and he's telling that Flavius Damianus had its own harbor with infrastructure for trading activity. And here there is something we found which really looks like this. So I'm a scientist. I would never say this is the harbor of Flavius Damianus, yeah, because it's not written there. But what I can tell is this is exactly the situation described in the literary sources. So perhaps if we would excavate the villa, we could find indications whether it is the villa of Flavius Damianus or not. So then here you see the situation, and here is the villa. So you see here very well preserved in the geophysical image. You know, you see here the walls, the rooms, and here these are towers. That's very typical for this villa type. Coming back to the harbor, a harbor tells you a lot. You know, you wouldn't expect so much from a harbor because, and now I'm talking about our research activity. It looks perhaps odd for you to do this kind of core drillings, what we did in the harbor basin. But what was the aim of this kind of research? The first aim was chronology. We wanted to know how long was the harbor open, yeah? How long was it connected to the sea? Now we know it, from the 11th century onwards it was closed, but until the 11th century it was open, and it was a very important harbor for pilgrims. Yeah? We also know this from literary sources. This is the dating. You know, we did a lot of radiocarbon dating to get a history, a chronology of the Ephesian harbor. So, these are the dates, yeah? That's just to give you, and this is then the reconstruction. So by these dates we know in which period it was still water, in which period it was already, I don't know in English, it was also, this is kind of material, this very dark material, torf. Eugene, do you know torf?
Torf.
Yeah?
Torf, yeah. Torf. Torf. Türkçesi tarz olur.
Oh, the same word. So then what we also did is the organic geochemistry. Geochemistry, and with this kind of analysis, we were working on the pollution of the harbor of Ephesus. We wanted to know how the harbor was polluted, because you can imagine that all the stuff from the city went to the harbor. So the organic material and the not organic material, for instance, Blei is kurşun in Turkish, so lead. Lead, yes, thank you very much. And then there was another interesting aspect, you know, about heavy mineral analysis, because we have a source that the Emperor Marcus Antoninus forbade the marble producing in Ephesus. Perhaps you have heard of this inscription. It's a very important inscription. The emperor writes that it's forbidden to do marble work in Ephesus because of the pollution of the harbor. And we scientists, archaeologists, we always thought, oh, this is a funny story, that the Romans thought that the marble was the reason why the harbor was polluted, and we think it was a natural pollution by a sedimentation process. And then we were looking for marble for years and years and years, for marble pieces in the harbor. We haven't found small marble pieces. And then a colleague said, no, the marble dust is not preserved, but you have to look for the project, for the material which was used to prepare the marble dust and to polish the marble surfaces, and this is Corunt. Yeah? And then we tried to look for Corunt, and we found enormous amounts of Corunt in the harbor basin of Ephesus, you know. And then we combined the situation of the harbor basin of Ephesus with the natural environment of Ephesus, yeah? And it's not there. So now we know that emperor was right. This was a rehabilitation of the Emperor Marcus Antoninus Pius, that the harbor dust was really a huge problem for the harbor of Ephesus, and that the restriction of marble work in Ephesus was really something very, very useful for the existence of the harbor bay. And this was done by this kind of analysis. Then, within the quadris, we found a lot of pollen. Yeah? And with this pollen, we are now able to reconstruct, on the one hand, the vegetation history of Ephesus, and on the other hand, also the food and dining system of the people in Ephesus. But just to tell you funny stories, we found this kind of material. This is was in huge quantities in Ephesus, and working on that, we found out that this material, these flowers, were put in between the cargoes, in between the amphoras which were shipped from the harbor of Ephesus and back. So this really funny results, here it is preserved. And also other flowers here. And another aspect in these quadrilles are parasites. You know, we have a lot of parasites, and from these parasites we know a lot about diseases of the Roman people in Ephesus. The things they were suffered from. So just to show you these really ugly parasites, but now we have a really close look to different diseases of humans in Ephesus and of animals in Ephesus. So this is the last ugly image. Then you will get more beautiful ones. Now we will visit the site of Ephesus, and I would like to give you also an insight in recent research results. And one is the Temple of Domitian. You all know the Temple of Domitian. You are guiding along, I have to tell. But a lot of things are unknown. I don't know whether you are aware of this fact. First of all, the reconstruction. Due to the research in the last years, we are now able, for the first time, to reconstruct the ground plan of the Temple of Domitian. And we will add this to our city plans now. You see there is the temple in the center, the altar in front of it, and it was surrounded on all four sides with halls, with stoai, and these stoai were open to the north, open to the east, but close to the west and close to the south. And here you have streets, you know, in the west and in the south. The interesting aspect in it, at this Temple of Domitian is that there are 3 levels. There is the ground level. This is the level where you stand, you know, where the reconstruction is of the facade, you know. I'm sure you are talking about this. Yeah? And here is the staircase up to the upper level. And here are the shops, you know. You are walking, Lekaniusstraße is here, you're walking down here, you have the shops and so on. So this is the ground level. Then there is a middle level, yeah? And the most important point in the middle level is the cryptoporticus. There is a cryptoporticus, so there is a tunnel here on 3 sides, and on the north side there was also a stoa in the middle level. And then you have the uppermost level, and this is the level where the temple stood. So you have to understand the different levels. It's not easy, perhaps we can talk about this today in Ephesus. It took me really weeks to work on that and to understand this system. On the uppermost level you have the temple, nothing is preserved. So this building on top of it is of Byzantine period, you just see the foundations here. And of course you have this head of Titus, this is not Domitian. It's also written in the museum, it's Domitian, but this is by a stylistic region, it's Titus, yeah? the brother of Domitian. And this, I'm not a specialist on stylistic, but, and talking, sorry? Talking about the temple itself, the type of the temple is a pseudo-dipteros, so that's the type of temple it's called, and it has several parallels, especially here in Anatolia, so it's a very common type for the Hellenistic and the early Roman period, and the best examples are written here, so Alabanda, Lagina, and Seleucia in the south of Turkey. So this is yeah, the type of temple the Ephesian temple belongs to. The altar, perhaps you're aware of the fact that the altar is quite well preserved. Parts of it were preserved on site. This is the excavation of it in the 1930s, and also parts of it are preserved in the Theatre Street. So it was transferred, the pieces were transferred in late antiquity from the Temple of Domitian to the Theatre Street, and there it was used for a Byzantine fountain. Also, geophysics worked on the Temple Terrace of Domitian. We will talk about the structure later on. So this is the temple, this is the stoa surrounding the temple, and here you see a lot of walls going around, and we were looking for those walls. This is a situation which we can see in the afternoon if you are interested, because usually it's not cleaned, but because I was working on this area, I let it clean. This is the hall, is the northern stoa on the middle terrace, you know, and this is the entrance to the cryptoporticus, and this is also a view to the cryptoporticus. And please be aware of this situation here, because here, exactly at that point, something was found during the excavation in the 60s. This is a look into the cryptoporticus. It's not available, it's not, because it's a depot of the museum, Efes Museum. And this is the fresco which was found, I will go back, exactly here. Yeah? And then it was removed. It's now in the Efes Museum, and it shows Demeter. And it was covered by a white plaster in antiquity. And my hypothesis is, we should perhaps try to find it. My hypothesis is that there are much more frescoes on the walls in the cryptoporticus. So the cryptoporticus was more or less a hall for goddess and goddesses. So this is the northern facade of the temple, the re-erection. Please be aware of the fact that the pieces here were not found on the terrace of Domitian, but on the lower agora, and they were transferred to here and to put it to do the reconstruction. This is this is the staircase, but we will see it in the afternoon. And this is the late antique building seen in geophysics. We did then the excavations, and you see it's a beautiful building, very well preserved, with one of the most beautiful late antique mosaics found in Ephesus. It's covered again with soil, so we cannot see it, but also the findings are really precious. And talking about dating, so from the excavation we know that the temple of Domitian, or the temple for the Flavian imperial house, was destroyed in the early 5th century, and then the area was used for building activity for this house until the end of the 6th century. Now coming to the house, it's not the house, we thought it is a house, now we know it's a city quarter. We will visit in the afternoon. It's our ongoing excavations, and because of the fact that we will see it, I will not talk about the architecture, because my colleague will explain you everything in the afternoon. What is quite interesting is that this is, as I said, not one building, this is one residence, and then a lot of shops and taverne and workshops. It's really a neighborhood, a city quarter of Ephesus, and we decided last week, and I hope it will work out, we decided that we will conserve it, we will preserve it, we will not cover it again. And so this will be something you can show on your tours in the next years. So conservation work will start next week. And this will be also something connecting, you know, if you go from the city center to the Church of St. Mary, I think this is a very nice addition. You could explain a living quarter, late antique living quarter, and it's not so boring to go this street without anything, in guiding tours. For us archaeologists, this excavation, for me, it was like heaven, you know, because as you see, everything is preserved. Here, talking about the window glass, yeah, it's amazing to have this preserved. You have all the bottles, the jewelry, glasses. You have, of course, the utilitarian pottery. amphora, and you have also odd things. I have shown this, I think, at my last presentation as well. So these are teeth of pigs, of boar, which were used, I think, to gilden surfaces.
Where is it?
This is now in the excavation depot in Selçuk, or where it was found.
Yeah, where it was found.
In the same house, so there were also workshops. And then what we did, we did all the wood analysis to reconstruct which kind of wood was used in the house, and it's quite interesting to see that, for instance, view was used for building activity, but then we have also other very special wood which was used just for furniture. So this is the workshops. We also found glass furnaces for glass production. So, and this is something we want to present in guiding tours, to make plates, to explain in which room was produced what, to give an impression for daily life in late antiquity. Late antiquity, this excavation brought to light 8,000 coins. Just this excavation, you have to imagine how much coins are around in Ephesus, and so we know that the house was used in late antiquity, in the Byzantine period. Also the seals, of course, and this is a very important coin, the lower coin of the Middle Ages, and also this amphora from the Middle Ages, which shows that Ephesus was not abandoned in the 7th century, but it was partly inhabited until the 14th century. It was just a village, yeah, in the last centuries, but nevertheless it was not abandoned. So, coming back to an interesting building in Pamučak, I'm quite sure you all know this is the entrance to the canal next to this Tatilkö. There's a erection, and we also did the investigations there with geophysical surveys and core drilling, and now we are able to reconstruct the situation in late antiquity. So this is an island, a half-island peninsula with a church and with an own harbor. You know, there is a harbor, and from the harbor you have a very beautiful staircase to the church on the one side and then down on the other side. And this is very typical for pilgrimage churches, you know, to have this course going on. You see here, you enter here via the harbor, you go up to the church, you can go down, and you can leave the church. So this is very typical for a Hajj, for a pilgrim activity. And so it's not a surprise. You see here, the building would be good to do some conservation work there. It's beautifully preserved. It's a pity, you know. And so there is no surprise that this reliquary was found there. And the reason why I wanted to show this this church and the situation is because this reliquary is now on display in the museum. And if you guide the people, tell them that this is a pilgrim reliquary from the Pamučak church, and it's quite interesting because the reliquary has a mechanism to be reopened and reopened and reopened again, and we know from sources that this kind of reliquaries were shown to the pilgrims so they could put oil on it and so on and so on. So this is just a drawing, it's also published nowadays. And that's the end of my presentation, and I hope I could show you the film, because I think I've shown you in my last presentation the cavern excavated in 2015. This was a big surprise, because in Ephesus we do this Kuru Duvare project, you know, this dry wall project, and they're to preserve each side of the slopes. And during this excavation, we found this late antique taverne, and it was full with material. Everything was preserved, and you really had the impression that while people were still drinking, something was happened, and they had to leave the taverne, and they left everything there. Everything was on the floors. Hundreds of vessels, as you can see, these are all the vessels of this small amphora, of this small taverne. And we did, so this is an impression just to show you. This is one room, and in this room we found those kind of things. And I will try to, shall I try to get the film? Yeah, I think so.
İsterseniz bir soruları alalım, ondan sonra şey yapalım.
Yes, yeah, okay.
Arkadaşlar sorusu olan var mı? Filme geçebiliriz.
No questions, sir.
Everything was clear, right? Peki.
This was unfortunately we had problems with the film, so but I will try to get it. This because it's funny, and the film here is. And the film is in German now, but it's available on YouTube in English and in Turkish. So you could, we did English, a Turkish, and a German version. Yeah.
Antik Roma'da günümüzden oldukça farklı olarak ortak siyasi alan ve farklı kültür öğeleri birleştiren bir anlat serisi. Varlıklı Asya'ya ait şehri olan Efes, Anadolu, Ege Denizi, yani Asya ve Avrupa arasındaki iklim noktasıdır. Milattan sonra 2. yüzyılda yaklaşık 250.000 kişiyi barındıran şehir, ticaret, kült ve yaylı üretim merkezi olarak Mavi Nostra, Akdeniz, Antik Roma'da
Sorry for the computer problems. Now we will go on with the film. It's a short film. It's about a bit over 5 minutes. As I said, this is the film of the results of the excavation of one taverne. Perhaps I think it is very important, and it's something I'm working on, to present our results also for community, for laymen, for everybody, not only for scientists, and that's the reason why we try to do this kind of films, but also popular books. And this kind of films we plan to do every year, one for recent results, or about our recent results. Looking at the title, you see Ergo Bibamus. This means, translated for those who are not familiar with Latin, is let's drink.
Mare Nostrum. Akdeniz, Antik Roma'da günümüzden oldukça farklı olarak ortak siyasi alan ve farklı kültür öğelerini birleştiren bir temas yeriydi. Varlıklı bir Asya eyaleti şehri olan Efesos, Anadolu ve Ege Denizi, yani Asya ve Avrupa arasındaki ilişme noktasıydı. Milattan sonra 2. yüzyılda yaklaşık 250.000 kişiyi barındıran şehir, ticaret, kült ve yerli yönetim merkezi olarak büyük bir prestije sahipti. Ekonomik açıdan refahın temelinde bereketli topraklar ve ham madde bakımından zengin bir alt bölgeye sahip olması, ayrıca su kaynakları ve bu alt bölgesiyle kenti birbirine bağlayan mükemmel ulaşım ağı gibi altyapısal koşullar belirleyici rol oynamıştır. Bu mevcut doğal şartlar, insan eliyle yaratılmış koşullarla da genişletilmiştir. Son derece güçlü olan ve azımsanmayacak ekonomik role sahip Efesos Artemis kutsal alanı, her türlü para işlemi için güvenilir bir banka olarak görülmekteydi. Şehrin iki dağı arasındaki 304 hektarlık kentsel alan, kapıların yakınında, liman çevresi ve kenar mahalleleri de kapsayacak bir şekilde inşa edilmiştir. Şehrin ana caddeleri, onurlandırma anıtları ve ihtişamlı heykel donanımlarıyla etkileyicidir. Özellikle bu durum, yüzyıllar boyu mermerle kaplanmış, onurlandırma anıtları ve galerilerle vurgulanarak ihtişamlı bir görünüm kazanmış Kuretler Caddesi için geçerlidir. Caddenin yukarı agora yakınındaki doğu bitiminde küçük bir meydan, kuzey kenarında ise geç antik dönemde bir sütun galeri yerleştirilmiştir. Caddeye açılan galeri, yağmur ve güneşten korunmayı sağlamasının yanında, arkasında bulunan ve henüz kazılmayan mekanları da düzenlemişti. 6. yüzyılın ikinci yarısında galeri sütunları bir duvarla örülmüş ve cadde tarafına açılacak şekilde girilebilir 3 küçük oda olarak düzenlenmiştir. Doğudaki mekanlar, donanımları hakkında özellikle bilgi verir. Burada 2 duvar boyunca uzanan örülmüş bir bank, bir dolap, yiyeceklerin hazırlandığı bir tezgah ve yanı sıra atıkların imha edildiği bir kanal görülür. Bitişik mekan, yakın bir zamanda duvarla kapatılarak bir zanaat atölyesine dönüştürülmüş olduğuna dair donatım elemanları gösterir. Tabanı üzerinde dağılmış durumda ve çok miktarda bulunan yeme içme kapları nedeniyle bir tabern olarak yorumlayabileceğimiz doğudaki mekana geri dönüyoruz. Yemeklerin hazırlanması ve müşterilerine servis edilmesinde keskin ağız kenarlı kaseler kullanılmaktaydı. Mekanda Efesos tipi 56 olarak tanımlanan yerel üretim ve ithal şarap amforaları depolanmıştı. Büyük olasılıkla bu masa amforalarıyla su ve baharat karışımı konuklara ikram ediliyordu. Bir yudumlu küçük maşrapalarda ayrıca mekanda çok sayıda bulunan diğer kap örnekleriydi. İmparator Heraklios dönemine denk gelen erken 7. yüzyıldaki ani bir yangın felaketiyle faaliyeti ansızın sonlanan mekanda mutfak kapları ve mobilyalar oldukları gibi kalmışlardır. Yoğun yangın tabakaları, taberne sahibi ve belki de müşterilerine şüphesiz ki büyük bir şaşkınlık yaşatmış güçlü bir yangına tanıklık etmektedir. İnsanların felaketi, arkeologların şansı. Tabernenin yıkımından 1400 yıl sonra kazısı yapılmış ve antik dönemdeki insanların Efesos'ta o ortamda geçirdikleri mutlu saatleri yeniden canlanmıştır.
So, thank you very much. So, if you can, you can watch this on YouTube, as I said, German, English, and Turkish, and also recommend it to your guests.